Hello and welcome to Beaver Off-Road on YouTube. What we're going to talk about now is the rear wheel assembly, or the wheel assemblies in general. Things you're going to want to look for in its operation and when you're inspecting it. Excuse me. You can check these out on the machine, but sometimes that's why I do a yearly inspection, because you can catch things out of these that you can't necessarily feel on the machine, spin it with a tire on or even with a tire off. If you get a major failure, it's probably going to be a little easier to pick out. First of all, this is, like I said, this is the rear wheel assembly. This would mount to your upper and lower control arms would mount here. You can see we'd have a bushing assembly that would ride up against here, and there'd be one on the other side. Your long bolt goes through there. A couple things I want to point out on this is, first is checking the bearing assembly. Let me get it on a good flat part of the counter. This one seems to be really good. The operation is really smooth. I don't have any side-to-side play. What I'm doing is trying to rock it like that to see if there's any real slop in the bearing. You shouldn't have more than maybe just a couple thousandths movement. It shouldn't be super tight either. It does have to have a little bit of play. These are all a sealed bearing unit. It does have a metal cap that goes over the bearing assembly. Now this has pretty much been cleaned out. I have my caliper mount here. I don't normally would remove them. I had one of these caliper mounts, and I believe it's this one, the way it looks, was actually cross-threaded, so I don't want to take this one apart to show how the caliper assembly comes off. But real quick, I can show you from off the front on that your caliper assembly would be, and they're all the same, front, rear, it doesn't really matter. This is your caliper assembly, your caliper slides. It just bolts through. This is threaded and bolts through to the wheel assembly housing down into the caliper bracket. Excuse me. Now I've taken this and cleaned it all out, but I want to show you some key points to check on this, especially being a rear wheel, because everybody knows that where the emergency brake is on these units, it's pretty easy to forget that you have the emergency brake on. I've done that numerous occasions, and now I just have no emergency brake left because my cables have pretty much fallen apart. But one of the issues that you have with that, or even when on the brake assembly, when the caliper or the emergency brake mechanism would lock up in there, people are having problems with your caliper being clamped onto this all the time. And what you're doing is you're generating a lot of heat in there. That heat gets transferred through your caliper and through your caliper mounting bracket and your caliper slides. That's why this is very important. I've talked about this on the forums before, and other people with problems, is that this is something that should be checked probably twice a year. There's an easy way to do it when it's on the machine, is when your caliper's on there, when your brake pad's on there, you should be able to, even if your brake pad's still a little tight on the rotor, you should be able to rock your caliper a little bit. If you can't and it just feels like it's on there really tight, I would recommend that you take your caliper off and you inspect your caliper slides. Now this is a caliper slide right here. Kind of hard to see. If you've ever done brakes on a car, it's the exact same as what's on a car. It's threaded on this end where your caliper bolts to it. And actually this goes into your caliper slide hole and should slide up and down pretty freely. Now like I said, I've already cleaned this one out. I'm still getting a little bit of grease out of there. It's really hard to get down into those caliper slides and those little holes to get those cleaned out. One of the things I've found that would work really good for cleaning inside these holes where the caliper slides go in your caliper mounting bracket is gun cleaning kits. You get a nice brush out of gun cleaning kit, and some of them will come with, you can get them with little wire brushes. Depending on the caliber, I think on this one when I did that, I actually used my 45, an old cleaning kit from my 45 ACP, and was able to scrub those out really good and use that. I've got a couple of them in the drawer that I use. They're probably the best brushes to get down in there. You could just buy them by the caliber, and you can also use it to clean your mounting points for your suspension. Now going back to these caliper areas, you can see, or may be able to see, this one is, mine are already kind of pitted, and I haven't been able to find these shafts in aftermarket yet of these slides. So what I did is I just took the time to sand them down with rough sandpaper and kept going all the way back to a 2000 grit sandpaper to smooth them out again. Probably took off a little extra metal, which might be good to make them. But what happens is, and same way with automotive, usually it's on your front brakes with automotive, but you'll find with a Reaper, these brakes tend to be very rear biased. If you really get on your brakes hard, you're usually going to lock up the back brake before you're ever going to lock up the front brake. The back brakes do a little bit more, they take a little bit more load, they take a little bit more heat. But what happens is, the grease that's in there, it'll actually just start to burn the grease and dry the grease right out. Or even just getting water in there when you're out four-wheeling and playing in the mud, because they're no fun if you're not playing in the mud. But that can get inside there because you have these little, you have your little rubber boots that are supposed to seal that, but these aren't a real tight fit, and it doesn't take a whole lot for water to pass between these. And you can see these fit right on your, like that, and your caliper goes on there, and it kind of actually acts as a spring also. That little rubber boot is supposed to have a little bit of spring to it and should bounce. Now, greasing these, they do actually make a caliper slide grease, which is a little bit high temperature grease. It's made to take the high temperatures and not dry out. I haven't had that good a success with it. I've still had it fail on the cars, so I haven't really used it on this. What I prefer to use is just good old Never Seas, anti-seize. And then once you've cleaned these out, I recommend you brush them out really good. Take a air compressor, blow all the crud out of there. You're gonna have stuff flying all over you and everywhere else. Good idea to wear safety glasses when you're blowing that out, because you're gonna have little particles flying all over. Now you don't want to grease. You don't want to put grease in there where this will fall down and compress against the grease, because what you're going to do is if you compress against the grease, they may not slide in is the way they should. And also what they'll do is they'll create their own suction against a bunch of grease in the bottom, and they will actually pull themselves in and won't want to spring out and slide out like they're supposed to. So what I recommend is when you grease these, is just take a little bit, grease the shaft. You don't have to really over grease. You can, you get a little extra on there. You also find that on these shafts there's also a flat side to it, and that's kind of an area to hold grease. And then once you grease those, you just kind of keep working them in, rotating them down. You can see that you'll get a little bit of the Never Seas that'll start to peel up. Now this is what I'm talking about. When I try to pull that out, that's created a seal in there, and it's creating a suction. It almost wants to pull that back down in. That's why I say you break that loose, wipe off a little excess, and just keep spinning that in there. Make sure you don't if it's good and clean, you shouldn't feel any grinding. It should be a good fit, and that feels pretty good. And Just keep rotating around there. You kind of want to work that anti-seize into the pores of the metal. So you want to spin around. You want to make sure you get everything coated really well. And then of course what I'll do is when I put this back together, I need to clean the inside of my boots out, inspect them to make sure there's no little tears in them. You could probably match these at an auto parts store if you got a tear in one of your little boots. And then we'll assemble that back together. But for right now, everything is feeling pretty good, feeling pretty clean. I like the way that fits. We'll swap these around, make sure they fit good. So that's a critical part on your. I haven't had much problem with the front ones. You always want to check those anyhow. And again, like I said, if you should be able to grab that caliper, and it should have a little bit of wobble to it when the brakes are just when the machine's just sitting in a steady state, not running or anything. And if you just feel like it's locked on there tight, you want to take that caliper off and check these slides, because that's actually. When I had these lock up on mine, I had one lock up so bad, I actually had to take a punch and oil it and heat this caliper bracket and drive the thing out of there. It was stuck in there that hard. And you could actually end up getting to the point where your caliper bracket just ends up being junk. Now that we figured that out, what we'll do is, and again, like I said, check the bearing, make sure that the action's really smooth. It shouldn't be, you can see this is a good bearing. It has still some resistance to it. That means it's pretty well packed with grease. It's smooth. They shouldn't spin just free. If they spin really free, you have a bearing going or on the process of going bad. Excuse me, because it's lost its grease in there, and so you should have a resistance to the grease. That's a really good feeling bearing right there. Now the other thing is, and I'll try to get this a little closer, is this is kind of a collection area because your axle is going to fit down in here, and there's a slight area here where this fits on the bearing, and you have your rotation area, and you'll get a lot of dirt that collects in this area. So it's always good while you got this all apart to scrape that dirt out of there. Now I recommend, when doing so, you actually try to tip it and scrape that dirt, getting the dirt to fall away from it, and do the best to scrape the dirt out of there. You don't really want to work at it and grind at it really hard, because you don't want to grind it in the bearing. The other thing I don't recommend is don't use compressed air to blow that dirt out from around this bearing assembly, because what you can do is you could actually end up, if you're blowing compressed air and you grind that dirt out of there, and you're working it out with a small screwdriver or something to scrape it out of there. By using compressed air, you could actually blow dirt into the bearing, and you might actually end up doing more harm than good. So you just want to kind of tip it away so you can break that dirt loose that's around there, get it out of the way, and have it fall away from it. And then you can wipe everything out really good and clean it up, and just, you know, wipe it out that way. Again, brake parts cleaner when you're cleaning anything. Now on this, I've already scrubbed down my rotor, made sure that it's free of grease. I would prefer that when my machine's just sitting around for a few days or a week, kind of like my cars, I would prefer to see my rotors rust. If your rotor rusts, that means you don't have any grease on your surface of your rotor, and that's when your brakes are going to work the best. If you get done washing it after you're just trying to make it look pretty, you've been out mudding or whatever, when you get all done and it dries off and your rotors rust, that is the ideal sign you want to have. Now, one other key point is that when this mounts, is you have your upper control arm and your lower control arm, or whichever it may end up being, however it goes into the machine. You have your long mounting bolts. And what that does is, that goes through here. Again, you have your bushing and your bushing collar that fits right there. And that bolt fits inside there and goes through and through the whole suspension. One key point to make, and I'll show you on this bolt, if I can turn this light back on. I don't know, kind of hard to see in there, but you can see this one, this bolt is already kind of pitted, and I've done the same thing to this as I have my my caliper slides, is I just sanded this bolt down really good to smooth it off again. But where this bolt rides through here, and also with your suspension, your inserts within your Teflon collars, is when you grease your suspension or where your bushings are, it doesn't force grease into this mounting point and these upper mounting points. It also doesn't force grease into your collar for your suspension. That's why it's really important to use an anti-seize in this area, because what I had on my machine when it was new, the first time I ever tore it down, I had my bolt actually start to seize right inside here. Your suspension is on here and your A-arms are spinning, but your collars and or your bushings, the collar can seize on there, and your bushing will spin on the collar and it'll just keep rusting up. I did the same thing again. I sanded the bolt down really good. I used an old barrel brush for cleaning these out really good, and now I can see it's really good and clean. It's sliding right through. There's just a little bit of play in that. That's kind of what I'd like. I'd like it not to be real tight. There's just a little bit of slopping. I'm going to say maybe 3/4 thousandths play in it. So what I'm going to do is, when I assemble these back together, is I want to make sure that I coat this whole bolt in anti-seize. And kind of what I do for these is, when you put this in, the best way to do it is actually put a little anti-seize on each side of this bolt, and then run it in and spin it around, and then pull it back the other way, and like that. Now I can feel that. That's starting to spin smooth, and also it doesn't have as much play because that grease is taking out the play. Not that it's going to take, but that's when I know it's starting to coat the inside of that suspension mount really good. That's what I want. I want to make sure that's coated good, because I don't want this to be seizing up when I'm in that nice smooth action through there. We'll do the same for this. Put it on each side. We'll draw it in each way. Get a little more on there. This is kind of one of those things, not like your caliper slide. You really can't get too much on this. I mean, you can have it all over, make a mess, and if you ever gotten never seize on you, you know it can be a pain in the butt to get off, and you'll touch your clothes. The next thing you know, you got it on your forehead and everywhere else. It just seems like once you touch it somewhere, it goes everywhere. Next thing you know, the wife's got it on her butt, and you don't know what happened there. So I just want to make sure that these are both going to be, and then the same applies as when I do this. I want to make sure I coat this bolt, and also you want to make sure that on your suspension on that collar, that the inside of that is well coated, because that will seize onto the bolt. And or for some reason, if you got to take the wheel assembly off, is you end up having to use a punch or another bolt to drive this bolt out, and then what happens is you damage the threads, and then you're into buying new bolts, and it just adds up, and then next thing you know, the world goes to hell. And but all in all, that's what I wanted to show you. We'll put this back together. We'll put the little slide boots on there. We want to make sure that the caliper slides are moving good. Your bearing's in really good shape. Everything's in good shape. I know, like I'm running my wheel spacers, so they're still on there. But all in all, that's how you want to inspect your wheel bearings. It's a little bit different for a front wheel bearing assembly. I mean, you're doing pretty much the same thing. You're checking the movement. If you want to tear your upper and lower ball joints out, I don't really care to do that all the time, but you can kind of do the same by just letting it collect together. I can check the movement of that bearing. I look for signs of grease coming out from the bearing. This one it doesn't spin real easily. It has that resistance, so I know it's still packed in grease. The ball joints are in good shape. Boot's a little bad on this one. I'm going to be replacing those anyhow. And then I'll do the same thing as I'll go along and clean this all up. And I'll do that with all 4 units. But that's just a little rundown of what you want to look for on your wheel assemblies. And if you're doing any kind of inspection, as I do, you're probably not going to tear it all down like I do all the time, but I'm just trying to show everybody all the parts on it. But that's one of the most critical things, and I'll just say it again, is you want to check your caliper slides on a regular basis, because if you have one of these C's in there, you're just going to be burning out brake pads. You're not going to have good braking action, and good chance you may never get that thing out of there. And I'm not sure what one of these caliper supports costs, but for what Orion charges for parts, it's probably going to cost you 2 arms and at least 1 leg. So we do want to make sure that we maintain that area and everything's in good shape. So I hope you learned a little bit about your wheel assembly and what you want to do to maintain it. Make sure you don't have any problems with it rusting or bolts seizing up in the unit. This one will be all clean and ready to go back together, and we'll see what we can do. And I thank you for watching Beaver Off-Road on YouTube, and have a good day.